All right, here is a clip that you have to see to believe. It features Robert F. Kennedy Jr. saying, instead of teaching kids to be less racist, we'd be better off teaching minority kids to be more resilient. And he would know because that's what worked for him.
You can't eliminate racism by telling people don't be racist. What you can do is we can make our kids resilient. When I was a kid, it was my uncle was running for president. He was the first Irish Catholic president. And there was a lot of Irish Catholic prejudice at that time and bigotry. And I was called a mackerel snatcher when I was a kid. I was called a Mick and all of these other, pejoratives. It never affected me. Somebody would call me those names and I'd say something's wrong with them.
Yeah. I gotta say, kudos to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for somehow finding a way to overcome all that discrimination. God knows how he did it, but look, if he found a way, anyone could. Imagine being a literal Kennedy, American royalty. Your uncle was president of the United States. Your father was the attorney general of the United States. Your grandfather was one of the richest men in the East Coast. And saying, oh my God, people called me so many names when I was a kid, but I didn't let it bother me. I found a way to overcome that prejudice of being called a mackerel snatcher. Have you guys even heard that before? It's just the balls for someone to do that. I can't imagine living in that kind of reality. And here's the thing. Why is it that conservatives or right wingers like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. are so focused on saying that racism isn't a problem? If we just stop talking about it, it'll go away. Something that isn't true for any real problem. And that's what it comes down to, is the fact that for right wingers, conservatives, Republicans, and whatever the hell you would list RFK in there, certainly not a leftist or anything, racism isn't an actual issue. That's why they say don't talk about it. Because when it comes to the issues that they do believe are real, they talk about those all the time. Like abortion is an issue, wokeness is an issue, trans people existing is an issue. All of that, those are real issues, and they never shut up about them because those are real problems in their book. Like racism isn't real. And to the extent that they believe racism does exist, it's racism towards white people. That's the racism that they believe exists. And guess what? They never stop talking about it. And I also want to take the opportunity to point this out, that what RFK said and what Glenn Beck was, goofily nodding along to is also a problem because of the way conservatives address racism. And to be fair, this isn't just conservatives. This is a large portion of society that see racism as individual animus or hatred or disgust towards a person because of the color of their skin. Like I'm going to treat you badly. I'm going to call you names as an individual because I hate this whatever race you are. That's not the racism that we're really worried about. I have to that's that, which is unfortunate. I see racism as this individual flaw, this moral failing, and that's not our primary concern. Listen, I cannot dictate whether an individual person is racist. I can't. You can be a racist and not act like one. I never know. What I care about are systemic issues of racism, and if we have systems that punish that harm a certain group of people more than another, that's what I'm talking about. And of course, right wingers love to say that systemic racism doesn't exist because the Civil Rights Act happened, and of course which is really funny because conservatives not big fans of the Civil Rights Act. Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. There's only a certain segment of the population that tries to limit those, and it's always the right. It happens every time, but they said, well, you can't point to any law on the books that says, since you're black, we are going to make sure you don't get into this neighborhood. Since you're black, we're going to make sure that you make less money. Like, that doesn't exist. Yes, that's true. However, that's where the systemic part comes in. For example, voting. If you go to this is like when Antonin Scalia helped shut down 1,300 voting locations across the South back when he was in the Supreme Court. Well, back when he was alive in the Supreme Court. Those mainly targeted areas where minorities voted, Black people specifically. So whenever you hear these stories about people standing in line 2, 3, 4 hours to vote, guess what communities those happen to take place in? They're not happening in rich white neighborhoods. They're not. And so the government is specifically making it easier for certain segments of the population to vote than the other. That is an example of systemic racism. And there's of course more examples of that going back decades and decades and decades. And this is the thing, conservatives pretend that just because there's nothing written down saying you have to treat Black people worse, that systemic racism isn't real. But they know that's not how it works, because listen to how often they bitch and whine and complain about being treated unfairly by the Facebook or Twitter. It's like, oh, they're coming after conservatives. I dare you to find me any rule in Facebook or Twitter or any social media company saying, all right, we're going to be harder on conservatives. You can't. It doesn't exist. However, you're saying, well, the way they're enforcing these laws, these rules, and these regulations has a disproportionate impact on conservatives. Oh, so you do understand how systemic prejudice works. So you do, right? It's, I don't know, that they do understand it, that they're just liars. Like that's it, and not particularly good ones.